Greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, and loving life. Remind everybody hit that like, share, and subscribe down below. There's a PayPal link for anybody who wants to share some love, and the StreamYard link is there for anybody who wants to join the panel. And we've got John with us again tonight. How you doing tonight, John?
We're doing good.
Good. Well, if you guys remember, we're talking about that Socratic logic again tonight. And so I'm just going to get into it and start reading from where we left off last night, as it relates to how you use Socratic and logic to define truth and such.
Yeah, it'd be a much easier world if we didn't have so much instructions in front of us, like telling us what to think, what to do, how to do this, how to do that. Wouldn't it be a better world, Keith, if we could just think for ourselves a lot more?
Oh,
You know?
most certainly. That's why they do that. Like I said, this public education system isn't teaching anybody to do anything but remember and regurgitate what is repetitive throughout history. That's not accepting that there's growth beyond doing the exact same thing we've been doing repeatedly throughout history. I mean, where's the growth and prosperity? It doesn't seem to be getting better except in the technology. And in that technology getting better, it seems to be getting disparagingly even worse as we see the separation of wealth and classes and the gross abuse and neglect of treatment of each other on the basic foundation of humanity because I'm just doing my job. It's pathetic. You know, we're not taught to think for ourselves and understand, hey, we might be hurting ourselves in doing this. Everybody thinks they're so harmless in this because I'm just doing my job and somebody else told me to do it. Not quite so. So I'm going to continue on with number 2. It says, we also want to know about ourselves so that we can change and improve our own lives, our behavior, our activities. Aristotle called this practical science, knowledge in practice, in action. This is why I always talk about everything in life is just like riding a bike. The more you do it, the better you get at it. You have to practice it. You have a point of where you start learning how to ride a bike by going up and down the sidewalk. Now, you know how to ride a bike, but now you can practice something a little bit more extensive by going beyond just around your own block. And now you start going cross country, across city parks and things like this. And then you get into BMX, and then you get into motors and stuff. So the initial foundation of logic and reason and practice extends into other greater extensions of that very same talent. Our actions will always speak louder than our words. Practical sciences include ethics and politics, as well as knowing how to do things as diverse as economics, singing, and surfing. And this goes to the aspect of one of the definitions we spoke about recently, plenary, and that's having full powers. In this commercial society, you have to have a semblance of having full powers to discern your own accounting, your own banking, your own trust, your own contracts, your own policy, all the things that the legal and lawful system demands of itself. You have to have a correlating perspective on your private side, showing that you have the full powers of knowing that discernment and that very distinct difference. This is why we get taken advantage of, because my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. If you don't know how that system works in its basic foundation, or even have any motivation to figure it out, you're never going to go anywhere. But once you do start digging into it, you find its simplicities. Again, it's just like the English language. It's kind of beautiful, and it's easy to make that discernment and that distinction between the two, the person and the living soul, things like that. The next one says, but most of all, number 3, we want to know simply in order to know. Example, to become larger on the inside, as it were, to expand our consciousness. Sciences that pursue this end, Aristotle called theoretical sciences, from the Greek word theoria, which means looking or contemplating. It's your imagination where you can see things and hold them in your mind and use them as part of an imagination for, or even to project into a future time or at a future time in remembering back upon something. This is what we use to create our choices before us. We did that before. I know this choice. Is there anything different here that might offer me a better choice if that last choice wasn't so good for me? Or if that choice was good, is there something that might be better for me still here? It's a matter of using that logic to put things in order. Theoretical sciences include such diverse things as physics, biology, theology, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. And this is why I urge people to start learning how to develop your own philosophy, your own theories. Start looking into the astronomy just as a educational mechanism of thought only. You don't have to believe in anything. Like I say all the time, don't believe me. Don't believe the neighbor. Don't believe the government. For crying out loud, don't believe your mother. Learn how to do your research so you know. That way you can figure out if it applies somewhere in your life, if it does, and how to apply it for yourself. Quit letting everybody else do that for you. These all have practical applications and uses, but they are first of all aimed at simply knowing and understanding the truth, even if there's no practical application of it. Greetings, sister. How you doing tonight?
All is well, beloved brother. All is well.
Good, good. So, any words on that? That was number 3 there. So we finished up with that part about the truth. It's got a little bit more here before we get to the next section, but the 3 main points were those: um, productive sciences, practical sciences, and theoretical sciences.
Yep. And sometimes we should clarify, like, what they are. Sometimes they blend, like physical
Right,
science could be chemistry, biology.
right. And oftentimes, yeah, when you look at these, number 3 says theoretical sciences. So we have something that's theoretical that we can imagine in our mind, generally based on some kind of prior observance that we can then use for a productive science by creating a product to then use in practice. So we have something that comes full circle because prior practice that we have observed created another image that we could create another product, generating something better from what was used before to continue that same cycle, but now more productive or more prosperous. People don't see how to use this stuff. It's all cyclical, and you have to learn how to use it. Remember, it's a trilogy too. There's 3 concepts here: productive science, practical science, and theoretical science. And it shows the full circle of that logic and reason thought. If you have a belief, clarify it so you can define it. If you observe something, imagine it and project it to others. Spread that observance, spread that knowledge. Goes on to say many people today think that theoretical sciences are the least important because they are not practical. And that's the epitome of being 180 degrees in the wrong. They are the very, we have that saying, the what is it, the mother nature is the necessity of invention is mother nature, or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. That's correct.
It's when we're at our own wits end and we have to physically do something ourselves that we have to be able to appreciate and therefore have the motivation to do it to begin with, that makes anything really valuable in our life. It's only when we get to share that with somebody else that it then grows and prospers in appreciation. It's like feed a man for a day, if you give him a fish. But you feed him for a lifetime if you teach him to fish. But still, the priority principle is to continue to teach that principle. The principle is the base foundation of everything. So your belief, your principles, your moral attitudes that you express in your actions places an order in things. A man is bound by his words, and if his actions speak louder than his words, that too is cyclical. Generally, people will write what his actions say. Be careful what they write, though. Be careful what you believe and how you perceive your actions. That's why I say I was a bitch-ass slave all my life. I wasn't using total reason and logic. If I had back then, I'd have had a lot of this figured out back then. It's not really intelligence. Again, it comes to reason and logic, and that doesn't take intellect. It just takes knowing there's certain orders and things, and that's a natural observance. Goes on to say, but Aristotle argued that the theoretical sciences were the most important for the same reason that practical sciences were more important than productive sciences, because their payoff is more intimate, their reward closer to home. In other words, you can't have a practical science where you practice the use of something known as a product, like a bike, that without having first the theoretical imagination. That is the foundation. Theoretical imagination is just like that belief. If you have a belief, you have to be able to clarify it and define it so others can observe it in the image and likeness that you are actually representing. You have to be able to convey your thought into a reality to then make it real. For they improve our very selves, while practical sciences improve our actions and lives, and productive sciences improve our world. See, once somebody has an imagination to create a bike and makes it real, then the rest of the world can take observance of that and benefit by reproducing it. That's what logic and reason brings to our life, and that's why we need to get out of all this insanity. All three are important, but just as our lives are more intimate to us than our external world, so our very selves are even more intimate to us than our lives, our deeds, and certainly more intimate and more important to us than the material things in our world. See, if it weren't for our personalities and our characteristics, other people wouldn't be able to determine what kind of characteristics and personalities we had, except by our material world that we live in. This is why we judge people as homeless or this or that. Oh, he's living in his car. Do you really think that's a judgment of character without knowing the people? That's a big aspect of life that most people miss because they use a false reason and logic. There is no order to that insane opinion. As a very famous and very practical philosopher argued 20 centuries ago, what does it profit a man to gain the world but to lose his own self? Mark 8:36. The original meaning of liberal arts education was this: the study of the truth for its own sake. The study of the truth for its own sake. Not only for the sake of what you can do with it or what you can make with it. The term liberal arts comes from Aristotle. He said that just as a man is called free when he expresses or when he exists for his own sake, and a slave when he exists for the sake of another man, so these studies are called free, liberal, or liberating. You're able to express yourself in a third person. This is the Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer is the slave to fiction. There's no other, he can't escape his bondage because somebody put him in bondage. There's not a damn thing that Tom Sawyer can do as a third person because it's just a fictional character. That's the only true place that a true slave exists, because it's total fiction. Because they exist for their own sake and not for the sake of anything else. The only thing that it served anybody else to read about Tom Sawyer was because they were willing to give over some coinage, and that was for the sake of the author, his sake alone. That was his intent. And as long as you want to invest in that, that's what it was. You get your part. You get the story of Tom Sawyer, knowing that it's total fiction, and there's nothing you can do about it except read it and talk about it. Logic will prove very useful to you in many ways, but its most important use is simply to help you see more clearly what is true and what is false. Just like I said with the computer programming, you can't enter something that creates something that the computer itself can't do because it was already pre-programmed as an if-then go-to setup. It can't do that itself. It has to have the manual input creating the program that says if then go to. AI will never be greater than man. Understand that. Logic and reason. Ask AI.
AI needs man.
Absolutely. It can't supersede man because of that very concept. Ask Siri, can AI who has greater capacity of logic and reason? And it's going to say AI. But that's only because AI can put it in order. Like I said, it's got a timestamp. But that proves the fallacy of AI as well, because again, if AI is depending on that order being input by me, if I'm faulted, then their AI record system, the timestamp system that says it's in order, is false. Just like the manual record, I tell everybody, it's false. You got to think about this stuff. If you're the one that's in error, how can AI beat you? You entered false shit. It's totally dependent on the United States from multiple different objectives. It cannot give you a discerned answer on where is the United States located, because in its information system, it has multiple things that tell you where the United States is located. A third grade educational map will say the United States is located here and have 48 contiguous states attached to it. Oops. So anyway, logic alone will not tell you what is true. It will give you certain facts that will allow you to discern what the truth is yourself. And the greater objective perspective you get from a large amount of people, the closer you're going to be able to discern that, yeah, that's absolute truth. You also need experience to get your premises. That's the observances. Logic can then draw your conclusions. Logic will tell you that if all leprechauns are elves and all hobbits are leprechauns, then it necessarily follows that all hobbits are elves. But logic will not tell you whether all leprechauns are elves. It only asks if all leprechauns are elves. It doesn't tell you that all leprechauns are elves. I once asked my very Irish neighbor whether she believes in leprechauns, and she answered, "Of course not. But they exist all the same, mind you." Perhaps the Irish should write their own logic textbook. See, if you can imagine them, then they exist in an imagination. Theoretical science. You can take that leprechaun and create a leprechaun in some form by some product, by creating some product, whether it be a candle or a doll or a movie or a cartoon. You get it? You can create that, and others will see by your clarification and definition, by giving a definite actual thing, a product, they can now see it. Oh yeah, that's a leprechaun. Don't you get it? They have logical clarity and consistency is admirable. In other words, it has a solidity, a consistency. It's solid. But to have only logical clarity and consistency is pitiful. In fact, it is a mark of insanity, as G.K. Chesterton pointed out. If you argue with a madman, it is extremely probable that you get the worst of it. For in many ways, his mind moves all the quicker for not being delayed by the things that go with good judgment. This is why I tell people, have patience. Take the time. I've been doing this shit for 8 years. People think I live in poverty or that I live off my companion. No. You need to understand the term poverty and what your value system is compared to mine and where the treasures lie as you live in your material realm. Not wanting to give it up, not willing to sacrifice. He is not hampered by a sense of humor or charity, or by the dumb certainties of experience. Indeed, the common phrase for insanity is in this respect a misleading one. The madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who lost everything except his reason. Oops. If a man says that he is the rightful king of England, it is no complete answer to say that the existing authorities call him mad. For if he were king of England, that might be the wisest thing for the existing authorities to do. Or if a man says that he is Jesus Christ, it is no answer to tell him that the world denies his divinity, for the world denied Christ. You understand that one? It doesn't matter if somebody comes forth and claims to be Jesus Christ and you try to deny him. It's already been done. Do something better. His mind moves in a perfect but narrow circle. A small circle is quite as infinite as a large circle, but though it is quite as infinite, it is not so large. This is why we think about that internal consciousness and that expansion and growing and learning and education. This is what tells us people generally fall back to certain tactics that are limited, and this is why I say a man's intellect is limited and biased by his own vocabulary. People like to think that they can go around babbling. It doesn't work when you learn how the language works. Go ahead, sister.
That reminds me of Proverbs 22:6, where it talks about train up a child in the way he should go, and when
And he
he
will
is
not
old, he
waver.
will not depart from it.
Yep.
And it's even now that I even think about it, it sounds like even what you said earlier about AI. You program something that into that computer device, and it will not depart because it's a program. It's already done. You can't change it unless it's a living being in its natural state and has logic to do so. I yield.
Absolutely. Good comparison. Absolutely. So it goes on, it says, in the same way, the insane explanation is quite as complete as the sane one, but it is not so large. So you are the creator and redeemer of the world, but what a small world it must be. What a little heaven you must inhabit, with angels no bigger than butterflies. How sad it must be to be God and an inadequate God. Is there really no life fuller and no love more marvelous than yours? How much happier would you be? How much more of you there would be if the hammer of a higher God could smash your small cosmos, scattering the stars like spangles and leaving you in the open, free like other men to look up as well as down. Cheering a madman is not arguing with a philosopher, it is casting out the devil. What do you think about that, guys? See, people think, I think part of the big problem is that most people don't want to repent. And so they think that they can just ask for forgiveness in asking in prayers in the name of Jesus Christ, and they forget about that initial step of asking for, going through this repentance and knowing that you've been acting mischievous or in an ill repute or something like that. You know, whether it be as a belligerent combatant or whatever, protesting or this and that. There are many ways that it can be misconstrued that a peaceful man is such a devious devil. So it's a matter of understanding yourself and learning to separate those kind of personages. He is no respecter of persons, and casting them out and saying, okay, it's now time to resurrect or redeem. As it said, they're a redeemer. So, you guys got anything on that? Because that's what I see.
The correspondent should separate from the ens legis, whatever it's called.
Correct. And that's why I think it's important to understand the re- repentance is something that only you can do, and in that it's a part of forgiveness, which is actually for yourself and not others. And the repentance is merely a promise between yourself and your higher power to not do it again, because you understand it's something wrong against your brother, which is a wrong against your own self. You know, it's actually self detrimental and therefore a stagnant point in life, and you need to get beyond that. That's why I say, if you're a full grown boy or girl, it's time to understand that and let's start acting that way. You know, it's that simple. Put down the emotions, start using the reason and logic as if though you've been taught that, because it is that simple. And I think it's something most anybody can learn as a matter of process. It's a mathematical putting things in an order, particularly language. Understanding that there's an authority, and in beginning was the word. How was that word developed? Was it pictorial? Was it enumerated? Getting back into the etymology, etiology, epistemology, things that people don't comprehend and think is so much work. But again, it's just start using simple reason and logic, and that stuff will come automatically in your natural discussions with other people having the same interest. Go ahead,
But
sister.
to what degree is one willing to repent and be honest with oneself? Because that's the that's the if, that's the big question.
Right. And that's why I say I've been a bitch ass slave. I've been a fucking fool. Um, I have to understand that many people are doing the exact same things today that I'm trying to help them understand what they're doing, so they can find a better way of doing it. And this is actually what we've been indoctrinated to do, is sign blindly and giving these blank endorsements and on these all these documents, and that is one of the first sins. Acting in person. He's no respecter of persons. Why are we always conducting every affair and assuming that everything we do in life is inducive or um, adducive, excuse me, of a signature in order to qualify its performance? What is this, owe no man anything but to love one another? Why are we instituting all these debt instruments? I find it inconsistent. And those are just scriptures and stuff that are set forth as a witness. And there are other witnesses that correlate and correspond in an agreement manner, in agreement fashion. That's all I'm doing is using reason and logic. If there's parallels, showing the parallels. This is why I say most things come in threes. So we're going to continue on. It says the next part is especially for teachers. Section 2, 17 ways this book is different. There are literally hundreds of logic texts in print and thousands more out of print. Why one more? How is this one different? How is it better? One, it's simple. It's better for most students because it's not the best. Example, most advanced, sophisticated, state-of-the-art text. Most beginning students need a simpler, easier, basic logic text. Just as most new computer owners would love to have a simple, dumb, obedient computer that they can master and use quickly and easily instead of one with so many bells and whistles, that by the time you master it, it's obsolete. But no one makes a dumb computer. The geniuses who make them are too proud to serve us dummies. See, back when I was learning computer programming, it started out with binary, the ones and zeros. And then it switched to something called basic text. It was just an if then, literally in English language. The language of the texting in the program was if A equals B, then go to C. And it was just a way to electronically provide a pathway in an electronic program of turning on signals on a lit screen to create like video games and stuff, or create text. And today, the computer language is so far out of my reach of learning how to do it right now that it goes to the same concept. By the time I learn today's computer language programming style, it will have changed and I'll have to learn a new one. This is how insane this language world is going in the computer text. So the next one, it says, well, I'm not. This is a dumb logic book. It's for beginners. For instance, its most basic points, which are summarized in section 4 of this introduction, all of logic in 2 pages, are repeated so often that even the slowest and most confused students should not lose their way and lose hope. And again, it's just slow students. I don't think they're slow. I think they probably have a more natural adaptation to patience. Go ahead.
Isn't that what they did with the word in its original sense? Over time, they gave different definitions and different meanings to it, as what you just represented.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. These languages that we use today, particularly this English language, is a lingua franca, and it merely takes words and adopts them from other languages. And then once they adopt them, it's not limited to just the first initial definition that they use that word for. They can then change that word in the English language through its vowel system, such as bund. They can change it to band, bend, bind, bond, all of which basically still mean the same thing. Abundance. That's a bond that he's already providing. And so long as you follow his way and steward his earth, his wife, Mother Nature, and follow her laws, guess what? You're going to live in prosperity, being able to go forth and multiply. replenishing not just your own kind, but the inherent food supply and stuff of Mother Nature and her creatures and plant life that you're going to need to sustain a growing population in any local area or along any migratory paths. Nature operates in an order already. Mankind is the one that's rebutting it, settling in these large, insane, concrete scabs. In my opinion, of course. Anyway, on to the next one. It says it's user friendly. Number 2 is user friendly. It is for two kinds of users. It is a classroom text for teachers and also a do-it-yourself text for individuals. The fact that it is simple enough for an intelligent do-it-yourselfer does not mean it is less useful for a teacher as a classroom text, unless obscure classroom texts are more useful than clear and simple ones. Number 3, it's practical. There's that practical science. It covers topics in proportion to probable student use. Example, it devotes more space than usual to topics like Socratic method, interpreting ordinary language and translating it in logical form, constructing effective syllogisms, material fallacies, like I said with the statement, excommunicate somebody from the community. You have to first define what community, and if you don't define that community according to the use of excommunicate, then you have a fallacy. Diagramming long arguments simply. This is what they portray as legalese. And 6, smoking out hidden premises, because these are some of the logical skills we need and use the most outside a logic class. Logic is like praying, fishing, or learning a language, or a skill like fishing. And that would be like imagining. Praying would be like imagining. You're putting into an intellectual concept that you want something to occur, an imagination. Hold on just a second. I'll be right back, folks. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. My apologies, folks. Duties to take care of. So let's continue on. It says logic is like praying, da 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 da. Much more of the work is in the will. Like I mentioned earlier, the motivation. You have to have first the imagination. And then you have to have the motivation to clarify it in order to be able to make it effective and definite in the minds of others. It is in the will, not the mind, in resolution and persistence and dogged honesty. So the will is to have that intended effect. It's not just in the mind, it's to have that manifest. That's an intent to fulfill an obligation. basically to yourself, of course. Actually practicing a few basic logical principles will make you a far more effective arguer, evaluator, researcher, and writer than knowing 10 times more and practicing it less. Most logic students learn too much, not too little. Instead of learning what they need to use, they learn what they neither need nor use. This is why this book contains many exercises on basics and only a very introductory treatment of non-basics. When we actually argue, obeying a few basic rules well is much more rare, more difficult, and more adequate than we usually think. Just imagine for a moment how some of the arguments you have heard or read would have been different if both sides had only obeyed this one elementary principle. Don't ignore your opponent's arguments and counter with your own. Don't just sit there waiting for your turn to attack. You must also defend by finding a logical fallacy, a false premise, or an ambiguous term in every single one of your opponent's arguments. I'm going to read that again, folks. Don't ignore your opponent's arguments and counter with your own. Don't just sit there waiting for your turn to attack. You must also defend by finding a logical fallacy, a false premise, or an ambiguous term in every single one of your opponent's arguments. And this is where you have to bring in now your logic and reason, a belief of yours that maybe you might want to define community. And let me clarify and make it definite, because I understand excommunicate in its origin is an ecclesiastical term, and therefore I presume the community you're talking about would be an ecclesiastical community such as the children of God. And if you think you can execute me from the children of God, you have a little bit of a problem there. So I ask, please define what you mean by the community. Then we'll be able to clarify the definite differences where you might want to think again. Just reason and logic. That's my attack. I'm not attacking Paul. I'm attacking the concept, and that remains the attack. It has a fallacy. Clarify and make sure that it's not a fallacy, and we can agree. Other than that, I've stated the fallacy. Okay, let's move on. Practical usefulness is the main reason for preferring classical Socratic, Aristotelian logic to modern symbolic logic. Like I said earlier, bend, bind, band, bund, bond. Symbolically, the vowels are different, but literally, in a different symbol, they're essentially almost the same thing. Even if the latter may be more theoretically adequate, it is like the difference between Einsteinian physics and Newtonian physics. So Newtonian physics was old and had improvements. This is what I'm talking about: abundance and prosperity and growth. Over time, things are supposed to grow, but in history, it seems like we're kind of stagnant here and there. We're not really growing too much anymore. With its basic laws of motion and its principles of simple machines, though Einstein is theoretically superior, Newton is still much more practical for beginners. I think I have never found anyone except a professional philosopher who actually used symbolic logic in actual conversation or debate. Interesting. That was the practical part. Number 4, it's linguistic. This is what I was talking about again with bend, bind, bund, band, and bond. It emphasizes the use and understanding of ordinary language. Every time we use one of those different terms, somehow, colloquially especially, it seems to mean something a little bit different. Example, it devotes considerable time to translating ordinary language into logical form, and it uses the logical forms closest to ordinary language. Because this is a skill teachers usually assume, but students usually lack. This is part of the public education system. The teachers don't teach a lot of this form, this concise English, probably because of the decline in the teaching of grammar. Obviously, I find today's students much more confused by language. Duh, that's why we have a 7th or 8th grade reading comprehension among the American population. Well, yeah, that's a strong country. And less by mathematical symbols than previous generations. They are the digital generation, not verbal. They need to relearn the logic of language, for thought can no more escape words than fish can escape waters. That's why I say learn how to coin your words or purse your lips. Learn what you're doing in this metaverse and understand it can come back to bite you if you don't comprehend what and where you're entering this stuff. There is, of course, a need for new and specialized forms of mathematical logic too. But this need is being well supplied, while the more basic need for the more basic logic is not being well supplied. People aren't learning about reason and logic. They're being taught to remember this and this and this and this. They're not taught to think for themselves and learn how to put things in order, to have those plenary powers to recognize when there's chaos, and you have the authority, the executive authority, to putting it in order. Your yay is your yay, your nay is your nay. And that's about logic and reason, which is a basic foundation of truth. Number 5, it's readable. That's why I talk about people that babble all the time. Its linguistic style is popular, personal, informal, light, and sometimes even humorous. In other words, it's not contagious with drama and hype and threats and corruption and all that. 6, it's traditional. It's traditional. It's cultural. That's why we have Germanic languages and European, Italian, and Greek and Latin and Aramaic, English, American English, British English. They're all different cultures as they develop and change over time. Logic and reason remains the same, but everything that uses logic and reason emerges and grows and reproduces and changes, and we have to learn how to change and adapt to it by adopting it, because it's happening naturally. Go ahead.
Well, brother, I was just thinking about what you said, and remember over time when you would utilize two, we have the vowel and the consonants, and usually when you had the ph, that would make the f sound, sound, right? So it would depend if you're using the ph in fallacy or the FALACY in fallacy, because the PH could mean the character, where the FALACY can be the validation or validity of something.
Correct. Yeah, it goes to the simplicity of the description of the words and how they're spelled out. And just knowing the spelling is important, as well as the sound, because you can have words that sound identical but have different spellings. Beat and beat, B-E-E-T and B-E-A-T. use them in the wrong context, and you can tell what people are speaking. It's like sheriff. If you understand the underlying construction of sheriff in its original term, it's share, which means shire, and riff means reeve, comes from reeve. And shire and reeve are pretty much identical. They are the same as saying authority, authority, principal, principal, prince, prince, king, king, um, official, official, officer, officer. So it's a babble. Just the term sheriff is babble. Why would you say officer, officer? Isn't it just officer or official or king? No matter what it is, steward. Steward was a word it refers to. So if it's just a steward, then just be a steward. Otherwise, you live. This is what I use to recognize their double speak and stuff, and that's why it's important to understand how to go back and look in the origins of how these English terms that we use today were originally formed. So it goes on to say, it says, it's traditional. Its master is Aristotle, the master of common sense, the man whose philosophy has become as embedded in the Western tradition as Confucius became embedded in the Chinese. Aristotle's master was Plato. All of Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato, said Whitehead. In the last battle, C.S. Lewis has the old professor say, it's all in Plato. All in Plato. Bless me. What do they teach them at these schools? Lewis says of his own thought, to lose what I owe to Plato and Aristotle would be like the amputation of a limb. In other words, he's recognizing where he got his information and putting it forth. And if he has any kind of new contemplations or imaginations or anything to expound upon those prior philosophies, he's at free will to do so. And this is what I'm trying to urge people to do as well, is learn how to observe and recognize and form your own philosophies so that you can go forth with those plenary powers and knowing that you have the ability to do things in this world that have a certain and pleasant and positive effect just simply by being reasonable and logical. Plato's master was Socrates. The most interesting, so we have Aristotle to Plato and then Plato to Socrates. The most interesting philosopher who ever lived and the father of the application of logic to philosophical questions. When Aristotle wrote the world's first logic text, he was reflecting on what Socrates had already done, defining the principles of Socrates' practice. Thus, our title, Socratic Logic. He put thought to work with reason of his observances and experiences to say, okay, if this, then this. And through those re-experiences and reoccurrences, he continued. And of course, a lot of those observances was from historical events that he was learning about through his teachers. So he was able to see this map looked familiar to this map, and this part of history repeated this part of history, just like he said earlier. Confucius having the same thing as a main philosopher as the Western philosophies have for Socrates. So it says this book is also traditional in the sense that it uses many classic examples from history and the great books. So it's not delineating down to just one, as it's already mentioned, several philosophers. So it's a more modern compilation of previous philosophers under this guy and his philosophy, or this group of authors and their philosophy, whatever it is. So it's a new projection of a set of philosophical principles that correlate and correspond with others. Just a commentary of it. So far, I think it's very well put together. A side benefit is thus the student's exposure to these many nuggets of traditional wisdom, any one of which may someday enable him to win a large amount of money on a quiz show somewhere down in the Plato's cave. His own little bit of humor there. And I relate this to in my experience in foster homes as a kid, I was subjected to many different religions. So I get many different objective views of the same basic principles. So it gave me a basic foundation of logic and reason of various different Christian principles through the various different sects, SECTs, of religion that I was subjected to in all the different foster homes, Presbyterian, Protestant, Methodist, all of it, you know. It's an interesting way to grow up and learn how to observe from different objective viewpoints. It says, since tradition, example, all of human history up until the present, has been much more religious than the present. I'll agree. We are losing the religious aspect. I'll agree. Many of the examples are about religious questions. There are at least 5 advantages to this. Religious questions are intrinsically interesting because we all know we have various different views of that very first thing of all 12-step programs, that very first step of honesty, of recognizing that there's a greater power than just myself. So intrinsically, we're curious as what do other people think where they get their power. And that's the origin of that power struggle, the ego struggle, this and that. What powers do you carry? Do you have the full powers? Do you have the plenary powers of managing your entire life and self-governing? Or are you going to try to present some kind of ID and get on a 911 call and call a dispatch and have them come to your rescue as some kind of goddamn hero white knighting for you for a statue? Come on. Learn to fucking grow up. What do you got, sister?
Is that where they came up with the ego and the id, the ID?
Absolutely. That's part of Plato's cave and what is it? What's his name's dog? But anyway, it goes on to say, let's see, good logic. Excuse me, I'm too far. They are not only subjectively interesting, but objectively, intrinsically important, and whether they are to be answered affirmatively or negatively. It's what people look for in debates in the true essence. But we get sidetracked by all of the drama and the emotions. Where if we stuck in our logic and reason, we'd see some real foundational arguments here that would wake a lot of people up if you could get beyond your emotions. Religion is either humanity's most important wisdom or its most important illusion. I like that. They are by nature not culturally and temporally relative. Like most questions of politics and ideology, but universally humanism. They are close to philosophical questions and lead naturally into them. In other words, it leads us into questioning ourselves, our own innate thoughts, abilities, emotions, responses, triggers, apathies, empathies, sympathies, all of these things that we use throughout our daily life to interact with other people and determine how to interact with those other people based on our situation versus theirs. They are by nature, 4. They are close to five. 5, my apology. And they are difficult, challenging, and mysterious. Difficult, challenging, and mysterious because along that path of trying to clarify our beliefs in our conversations, we come across those differences and thereby prevent each other from being able to state the definite aspects that we're trying to convey because we're already stopped at step number 2 trying to argue. We have to learn how to accept the differences so we can maybe find some way to morph them together, just like this beautiful English language allows us to get away with deeming something a sheriff, an officer. I mean, why do you need to restate it? That's literally Babel having to say something twice in a dual world. Goes on to say, believers or non-believers in any religion should be able to use this book with profit. That's saying even atheists, because it doesn't matter what religion. You go through a logical process that says if, then, go to. It's putting things in order, and you do that forwards and backwards. It's commonsensical. Logic is like psychoanalysis. And this is why you have to look in yourself. You have to look at your own psychology. You have to analyze yourself and see if what you're saying is really babble, or if you sound like an intellect, or if that's what you want to sound like, or if there's a different message. Like I say, it's not about me. It's about the message. Always. And that message is simply so we can keep learning how to communicate better and better and become better and better. In it, logic is like psychoanalysis in that it does not impose anything upon you from outside, but only clarifies what is already present in you. Like I said, you got to look inside yourself. That's that psychoanalysis. You have to look inside. That's the only place it exists. I'm not going to go to a psychologist and sit there and run my mouth and have her call that a psychoanalysis, no matter what she wants. That's not a psychoanalysis according to the definition. It's an internal thing. That would be a psychological examination from an outside objective view. But something naturally and innately present, good logic never contradicts common sense. If we mean by common sense, not something the polls determine. In other words, common sense is something that you can use by yourself in good faith that most other people of age of discernment, of course, and this is why I say once you're a big grown-up boy and girl, there's a certain point of reason and logic that you just got to stop being stupid and start making better choices. But something naturally and innately present in every mind. Again, there's morals and reason and logic and all that, and that's that point in time where you just got to learn it's time to act like he's a grown-up boy and girl because everybody else can see you. You ain't running around here like a 2-year-old in diapers anymore. The American philosopher C.I. Lewis wrote that everyone knows the distinction of cogent reasoning from fallacy. In other words, you're able to give your sources, you're able to connect the dots, you're able to show 1, 2, 3, it goes according to this order. And if it doesn't, those objectively viewing will be able to point that out if they have reason and logic. The study of logic appeals to no criterion not already present in the learner's mind. This is inherent why I'm trying to push this stuff, folks. You're not going to learn much without learning how to use reason and logic, which is the last thing they're going to teach anybody in those public education systems. They're going to teach you a form of reason and logic, which is to remember this, then that. They're programming you instead of teaching you how to think for yourself by using an if-then-go-to programming of reason and logic. They've skewed everything and flipped everything around. They've used it against us very well. Like I said, I was a bitch ass babe. I was a fucking fool. If any principle, oops, go ahead, sister.
So then there would be a difference between intellect, reasoning, and also education.
Correct. Your intellect is like a level that people will show in their language use, in their social life, and when you observe other people, you will see it. You should be able to anyway, a certain level of class or something like that style, um, and you'll be able to determine this kind of stuff in their language just as well as you would with their physical observances. Now, I'm not trying to tell you to classify people, certainly not. But through your natural observances in your own communities, you should be able to see certain elements in people that come forth and start using certain tactics in their language. And this is why I say if you come forth to me with in a spiritual presence, I'm going to recognize it because I'm going to comprehend your words are very peaceful and stuff. They're not going to be contradictory. They're not going to be so claiming or anything like that. Or if they are, I'm going to have to either accept them or be able to say what I need to say about them in a blunt manner and, make any kind of rebuttal that might need to be made in hopes that it's not going to be taken as an offense or affront. This is the inherent problem with today's society is people refuse to learn how to communicate properly by leaving their fucking emotions out.
So then would one say that the highest of knowledge is intelligence and the lowest would be indoctrination between the education of meaning of words when it comes to knowledge?
Right, and I would say actually experience is the higher element of any knowledge, because without experience, you're really not going to have a physical manifestation of product in yourself to be able to then practice. So again, it comes down to the element of feed a man for a day if you give him a fish, but you feed him for a lifetime if you teach him. But again, the foundational principle is to teach them so that they may teach others, because that's the theoretical science of being able to grow that idea for greater prosperity and abundance, making manifest the thought, all of its greatness and glory, and not having it stunted somewhere along the way because you decide, well, we don't need a better way to fish or something like that. You can always create something better as long as you use it with reason and logic so that it has its order, its place in life. It's when we create things that put that abundance out of balance that's not reasonable and logic, and we have to think about that and balance it back in with reason and logic. That's why they have those regulations on international whaling and things like that. So anyway, I'm going to finish up here with this last one real quick here, and then we'll discuss anything else. We all have used logic. Oops, let me go. I missed the wrong spot again. I'm getting bad at this. Maybe I need another hit. If any principle in this book ever seems to contradict what you know by innate common sense, something is wrong with that principle. This is one of the main reasons for preferring traditional Aristotelian logic to the more fashionable modern symbolic logic. Aristotelian logic is far closer to common sense. That is why it is far easier to apply and use in ordinary conversations. Like I was saying earlier, today's philosophies are covering, or philosophers have a great multitude of various different philosophies they follow from different philosophers, and therefore it seems to be an expansive It's kind of like legalese philosophy on a basic, simple language in that sense, if you know what I mean. We all have used logic already, unconsciously, many times every day. Even animals do that. Chrysippus, a Stoic philosopher of the 3rd century, watched a dog chasing a rabbit come to a fork in the road. The dog sniffed at 2 of the 3 paths and then ran down the 3rd without taking the time to sniff at it. Even the dog instinctively used logic to catch a real-world rabbit. He used a disjunctive syllogism. Either the rabbit took road A or B or C, not A or B, therefore C. In one of Molaire's comedies, Monsieur Jordan suddenly discovers that his amazement, or to his amazement, that he was speaking in prose all his life. You have been thinking and speaking in logic all your life. This course helps you to know thyself. And with that, I want to mention again Samuel Clemens, Tom Sawyer, and Mark Twain. And this is the importance of learning how to speak in prose. You're going to put that person in a 3rd place position and use that logic and reason only, so that if there isn't any error, it's already known as fiction, and the Christian society can't just throw you on a cross or sacrifice you. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what history says. When you start bringing about new philosophies on new theories and trying to reproduce them in other people's minds so they start practicing those philosophies. Oops, now you've mechanized something manifest from a spiritual aspect into the real world, and they may not like it because it might destroy their culture. This is the power of the mind and knowing how you can coin your words by using the truth of reason and logic. That's all we're trying to do, folks. You got anything to say on that, sister, before we check out for the night?
Yes, brother, I do. I was just thinking about the words you said, principle and principle. They sound the same almost when you pronounce those words, whereas the principal denotes the person in the highest authority, where the principle is the rule, standard, or fundamental truth. So again, it's, you know, who you say you are as a man know thyself, and you as a man knowing thyself, he should be able to walk upright in his own right. I yield.
Absolutely, and that's why I say, being able to make your yay, and your nay. And it's important to understand your power in that and where it actually comes from. And all glory goes to Him. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. If we're going to put things in order, then let's start there. It's pure and simple. And so you folks know with me, I love you. I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back or not. And that's to say, I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you don't respect me. And that's on you. So may God bless you and have a good night. Bye now.